What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Altitude Show. I'm your host, Dave Brinker. Today we have Ben O'Brien on the podcast. Ben is the host of the Woodside Podcast. He's the former host of the Hunting Collective podcast. He used to work at Yeti, used to work at Meat Eater. He's been around the industry for a while. We kind of grew up in the hunting industry together. He's a conservationist, a writer, editor. He actually is one of the people that introduced Joe Rogan to hunting. He's a really interesting guy. Love talking to him. Check it out. Let me know what you think. Peace. The Altitude Show is brought to you by Peaks Equipment, the world's leading technical, hard goods, and accessories brand for backcountry enthusiasts. From trekking poles to headlamps to best-in-class gaiters, Peaks delivers a system of products that work to achieve optimal performance in the harshest conditions. Don't suffer on your hunting adventures. Peaks enables you to thrive on the mountain when everyone else is going home. Visit peaksequipment.com and use code ALTITUDE for 10% off today. That's ALTITUDE for 10% off on peaksequipment.com. Outdoor Class is the new source of premium outdoor education from trusted and knowledgeable experts. For hunters committed to improving their skills, Outdoor Class is the only subscription-based e-learning platform that provides unlimited access to video lessons from the world's most respected experts. Learn from industry leaders like Corey Jacobson, Randy Newberg, Remy Warren, and other experts across all the topics that affect you as a hunter. Make sure to follow Outdoor Class Official on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, and take your game to the next level by going to outdoorclass.com. You can use code ALTITUDE at checkout for 20% off. That is Altitude at checkout for 20% off at outdoorclass.com. All right, everyone. Welcome to the Altitude Show. I got Ben O'Brien, a good friend of mine, on the show today. Welcome, Ben.
Hey, man. What's going on?
Well, I'm just looking at your beautiful hairdo blowing in the wind in Bozeman, Montana. Looks like is it cold there today?
It's cold as could possibly be. I just ran out to get a burrito and a caffeinated beverage for this conversation, and it was cold as balls out there.
Where's your burrito spot in Bozeman? I got to know because I have my own burrito spot in Bozeman.
I can't give out my hot spots. I don't give out waypoints.
There's a few good burritos in Bozeman.
That's true. There is good burritos in Bozeman. Mine is Mr. Burrito.
Where's that?
The lady, it's right in Four Corners.
Okay.
Yeah, they just opened like a drive-through deal, and you could rob a bank with the actual burrito. It weighs about 40 pounds. If you hit someone in the head with it,
all you want to do afterwards is take a nap.
Yeah, that's it. So now that's why I got myself an energy drink and a burrito to kind of mix, just as a mix for this podcast.
Well, welcome. For those that don't know, Ben and I have been friends for quite some time. We kind of grew up in the hunting industry together, if you want to say it that way. Ben, you got your start in media. Is that correct?
I did. Yeah, I got an old journalism degree, which has been, fairly useful by the by. I came out of journalism school and got a job at the National Rifle Association for American Hunter magazine. I was their first digital editor. I was like 20. I want to say I was 22 years old.
Is that one of those things where you're like, yeah, I'll do that, but let me Google it real quick and see what that guy does?
Yeah, well, I met a guy in a bar. Who I'd known from my hometown, Pete Angle. Shout out to Pete Angle. I met him in a bar in my hometown. I'm 21 years old. I was doing a bunch of things, interning, running around, had a bunch of jobs. I was writing and doing media, and he started telling me about this job that he had working for a hunting magazine where he got to go to Africa and hunt. And he was showing me all these pictures. I was like, that's not a job. And he said, yeah, it is a job, and I'm actually leaving that job to go to I think he was going to Under Armour for marketing at the time. Then this is, 14, 15 years ago. And so he said, you should apply. So I applied and, of course, didn't get the job. They shut me down immediately. But the next months later, probably 6 months later, they had a job come open. I applied for that one and somehow got it. And I will tell you that the poor HR lady called me and said, you got the job, just a hot tip. Your MySpace page, you should take some of the photos off of it. This is how long ago it was.
Is this MySpace page still up? I heard you can still look up your MySpace page.
I never took any of the photos off of it, so if anybody can find it.
Those are going to come back to haunt you, buddy.
There was a few cake stand photos, maybe an aluminum foil bowl or something in there.
That's legal now, so we don't have to hide that anymore.
All very innocent. All very innocent.
What made you want to get into journalism? That's not something you hear a lot of teenagers say. I want to get into journalism.
Yeah. Well, hopefully they're not saying it now because it's not a great.
It's pretty rough road. Yeah.
The profession is kind of burning right now. It's not kind of. It's pretty much ashes from what it was when I got in it. But I always just, man, it was sports for me in the beginning. I probably knew that I wasn't going to be an athlete to the caliber to be professional, but I really did love sports. I was good at writing, and I loved hunting too. And so I remember when I was, I must have been maybe 12 or 13. There was an outdoor writing school based out of Canada. And I wrote this very poetic deer hunting story and sent it to this guy and said, like, tell me this is good. And he just kind of, as a good editor does, he gave me some constructive feedback. He was like, man, just, you don't have to be so poetic. I know you love hunting, but you just calm down and write your experiences. You don't have to try to spin it that much. And that was the first time I realized, oh, he didn't tell me just not to pursue this. He said, you're a really good writer. And that was the first time I ever realized I could do it. And I thought I was going to be a sports writer for a long time, and until I realized that was not much fun at all. You just kind of wrote about what other people did all day.
Yeah, writing's one of those interesting things where, oh, hold on, let's pause. I have a fire station behind my house here, and this is
that should be part of the intro song.
This is the first time it's actually gone off. I've been waiting for it to happen.
How many of these have you done? Are you like?
I'm getting close to 10 now.
Nice. You're doing it in a professional way. Which I appreciate, putting like a couple dozen in the can.
I'm gonna do 25 in the can before I release any. I kind of want it to. I want it to have a savings account, almost so I'm not chasing my tail.
Yeah, but I did 7 or 8 in the can, and then I was like, I balance it out because I'm frustrated when it doesn't feel current.
Mm-hmm.
There's like a creative energy sometimes that frustrates me when you're like, I don't even remember what I said, and I'm launching a thing this week. And so I try to balance it. It's sometimes frustrating, but
I think what I'm going to do is I'll have my savings account of episodes that are kind of timeless, but then I'll probably do some solo stuff or maybe some stuff with my wife that's more current event driven, But writing's one of those things where I remember when I was at that age, writing, like when you had to write like a 1-page paper, like I would put it off for like 2 months, even though it would probably only take me like 15 minutes to do. So it's interesting to me that when people, because journalism by nature is a lot of work, and then like you're supposed to gather all this evidence and get all these sources, and then you have to sit down and write. Like, who wants to do that? So I find it. That's why I asked you. I find it interesting that you actually wanted to get into that, because most people that age are like, F writing, man. I don't want to write any more damn essays.
Right. No, you're right, man. And I think a big part of it for me was like wanting to go deeper into what I loved. And so it wasn't for me. And I just could sit down and write with joy about the things that I was passionate about. So there was never really much struggle for me. Although I'll say, like, when I became a professional at it, writing is the most painful creative endeavor that I have ever done. Like,
what do you mean?
Podcasting is pretty easy, especially when you're just jamming out with a friend and talking and comparing notes and having a good time. Putting a TV show together, writing a TV show, scripting out a 22-minute show for TV. I've done that. It's sometimes a lot of work, but it can be fun, and it is, sometimes it's light on its loafers in terms of how much anguish is involved creatively. But for me, writing, especially if I'm writing something that's a long feature, or that's, I hope one day to write a book. I have a couple things in the works with that. It is a painful process, a painful creative process where there's self-doubt, there is constant refinement. It's never perfect. It's a very, like I said, painful creative process, and it's harder creatively than anything I've ever done. So.
Yeah, it's. I've done some writing just by nature of being in marketing and stuff, obviously, but on the songwriting side, this is my kind of comparison. I always think about, like, you when you write a song, you write a lot of just hundreds or thousands of words that are just junk. But what you start, let's say you get a song and it's like, okay, this is a song now. It's 3.5 minutes, 4 minutes, and you got like 3 verses and a couple choruses and a bridge. You slave over that for, I mean, I've slaved over songs for months. Like I've put songs away, and I'm talking about, I don't know how many words, like what the actual word count in that song is, but it's not very many when you start considering that the choruses repeat themselves, and the verses are like 4 lines each. You know, so you start comparing that to like an article or a book from a writer that has to actually edit thousands and thousands and thousands of words and make sure that their sources are cited and all these things. And here I am, stressing out over a song that maybe only has like 50 actual words in it, and then that just repeat. Yeah. So I'm like, and I want to write a book too, and I actually have started writing a book, but I fall into the same traps. It seems like it's like I'll start telling a really honest story that's like really long and drawn out. I'm like, dude, no one wants to read this damn thing. This is why 3-minute songs are so great, because people can like listen for 1:15 and kind of get the gist of it and turn it off. But yeah. So, you know, how do you get past that as a writer? Like, it seems like the best authors are the ones that are the most real and aren't scared, like kind of get over that self-doubt maybe.
Yeah, self-doubt that's a big one, but it's also just knowing what that process is. If you're a new writer, you know, and you go to write let's just make it easy, a 2,400 word feature for an article, right? You get your first feature assignment. I remember when my first feature assignment, the obsessive nature of relaying either a first person story or a third person narrative, the obsessive nature of trying to get each word right, and the flow and the grammar and the punctuation, and knowing that most everything you write professionally, at least, maybe not these days with the internet, but professionally as a writer, there's an editor at the end of this thing. It's going to tell you what's wrong with it. And part of being a proficient writer is being proficient at all the things that make sentence structure, grammar, punctuation, and style, in most cases AP style, work. And so you feel that pressure of somebody on the back end is going to read this, and your reputation, your professionalism, your craft kind of rides on it being correct and it being.
But isn't their job to polish it and make it correct? Can't you turn in something that's kind of 80% baked and they can fix it?
Don't you tell these young creatives, because I edit plenty of shit.
My wife's my editor, and so I have my 2 biggest faults are I write run-on sentences.
Yep.
And my punctuation sucks. And I remember when early Sitka days, we were writing our like first couple catalogs. If I go back and read them now, it is so awful, dude. Like just the run-on sentences. Anyway, so my wife's my editor, but usually what I'll do is I'll get a thought down, and then I'll be like, honey, can you fix this? And I just take creative freedom. Like, as long as the facts don't change, or like the creative magic is still there, you can fix whatever you want. Isn't that kind of what an editor's job is? Well,
as an editor and a writer, I would say I've had some very esteemed writers in our space and in the outdoor and hunting space who were awful. And so they didn't, I think they were used to having an editor clean their stuff up and take care of it. And I just think as a somebody who's trying to relay your thoughts in a succinct way and bring a reader along and create some emotionality and create some real purpose in the words, you should be putting pressure on yourself no matter how good an editor you got on the back end.
Yeah.
And then that's where that pressure and that kind of unending, especially when it's a research project and you're really you're trying to go deep in the journalistic sense to tell a story. Most of those things are endless. You have to stop yourself in terms of how much time do I have to research this topic? How deep can I go? And I think, journalism majors, guys like me, I'm pretty obsessive about getting the story right. And so you end up sacrificing your time. You end up beating yourself up. I've heard like Matt Taibbi, who's one of my favorite writers and journalists, probably the preeminent journalist on this planet right now, talk about this too, where you're your own worst critic, and that's kind of part of the game.
But so now you obviously started a podcast called The Hunting Collective. What was that? 6 years ago, 7 years ago?
Yeah, it's been a while. Yeah, it's been 4 or 5 years.
You kind of had this trajectory through the hunting industry as a writer and an editor. You kind of worked your way up, and all of a sudden you're working at Yeti, which at the time and still today is one of the coolest brands to work for, which we can talk about. I do want to talk about that, but
yeah,
I'm curious what made you want to start a podcast? Who the hell? One person told me when I was starting this podcast, he said, "I want to do a podcast with you on why to not start a podcast." So I'm curious, what made you want to start a podcast?
Well, this is gonna sound incredibly name droppy, but it's the truth. I was on a hunt. This freaking thing, sorry.
Name drops are okay on my show.
Okay, this is a real story. It's gonna sound name droppy, but it's a disappointing tale. It's a tale of failure. So, I was a magazine editor at Peterson's Hunting. I think my title was like executive editor or something. I was 28 years old. And to me, at 28 years old, being the editor of the biggest hunting only magazine in the United States was the coolest thing that ever happened to me. As a journalist, as a writer, I was writing cover stories. I was doing all the things I wanted to do when I got in the industry. And I was writing a story we were calling it the Meat Eater Revolution, and it was about guys like Steve Rinella, Georgia Pellegrini, a bunch of folks in our space at the time that were really pushing the field to table movement, pushing hunting for meat. It was a trend at the time. It's a little bit more part of our culture now than it was then. So I'm writing this story, and I'm talking to Steve Rinella, and I said, who else in the world, in your world, is hunting just for meat that I could talk to, including this story? And he goes, well, Joe Rogan I just went hunting with him for the first time. And I was like, the Fear Factor guy? So he was like, yeah, the Fear Factor guy. And so he said, just call him. So he gave me his number. I called him, and we talked for like 2.5 hours about everything. Wolves. I think we talked about wolves for an hour and a half, as you might imagine, talking to Rogan. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know. I think he had his podcast then, but I had never listened to it. I didn't even know. All I knew is he was on news radio, and he was the Fear Factor dude. That's all I knew. And we got along terrifically. And he said, hey, we should do a hunt or something. I said, well, what hunt would you want to do? And he just said, the most meat possible. At that time, that's where he was. I said, all right, man. Hung up. We ended up just doing a sidebar about Joe. We didn't even put him really in the story because we didn't have time. So he just got like a bit of a sidebar in there. And so we put that magazine out. It went really well. And the editors came back to me. The other editors came back. So we want to do a follow-up. What should we do? I was like, well, let's call Rogan and see if he'll go on that one of those hunts where we get all the meat. And so I called Joe and said, hey, you want to go? Let's do this hunt we were talking about. I said, let's do a moose hunt. He said, okay. And so I had never met him before. Pretty quickly, like 3-4 months later, we were going to British Columbia we had Sam Soholt, who was just like just out of, he had to be maybe 22 or 3 or 4 at the time. He had never really photographed much of anything. Especially as big as what we were trying to do. So we were going to shoot a cover story. It was going to be the follow-up to the Meat Eater Revolution. It was going to be a story about Joe. So we fly up to Canada. We get there. It's me, it's Joe, it's Sam. Mike Hawkridge is our guide. we had the best time. We laughed. Like, I didn't know Joe for shit. It could have gone awful. I mean, he was coming from Hollywood. It could have been the worst time, the worst hunt ever, because you literally spending 5 days hiking around with somebody you've never met. But turns out he's an awesome dude. Turns out he was so passionate about hunting. He was like a little kid with everything that we did. Every rifle, every bow, every moose we saw, every track we saw, he was asking questions. He was curious. And he's also a comedian, so all we did was laugh the entire time. So we took this photo of him in a giant moose quarter after he shoots this bull. And that night we got hammered drunk on spiced rum in this tiny little cabin in British Columbia. And he said, "Hey man, you're funny. You should do a podcast." And I was like, I'm kind of living my dream as a podcast editor. Or I mean, as a magazine editor. Why would I do a podcast? It's like, that's something people do in basements. That's not a thing that anyone does. And he's like, "I don't know, man. I'd support you and I'd help you out if you want to do one." And so I remember talking to Sam that night, like, "I'm going to do it, man. I'm going to do it." And I got back home after the hunt. And not too long after that, got a call to go work at Yeti. Totally forgot about the podcast idea. And that was the dumbest decision that I ever made. The dumbest decision I ever made. It took me another 2.5, 3 years to actually start a podcast. But suffice to say, the answer to the question is getting to meet Joe, getting introduced to who he was, and then watching, like a dumbass, watching his podcast grow. Because at the time we went on that moose hunt, I think that was about 8 years ago. At the time we went on that moose hunt, his podcast was big, but it wasn't anywhere near where it is today. I mean, obviously. And so I got to watch him go through that growth over those years. We hunted a bunch together in the following 3 years. And every time we got together, he would ask me, "Hey, you got that going yet? You got that going yet?" And I lagged it for like 3 years, but finally got it going. And I wish I had listened to him in the beginning, because I've had a great run of podcasting. But had I listened to him, it would be such a different life.
Certainly ahead of the curve, right?
Way ahead. Yeah. Way ahead.
But it's crazy, and I don't think people realize, that haven't had the chance to spend any time with Joe, which is most people, that he's the most curious. And I've only been around, I've spent a little bit of time with him, but not tons. But the time I have spent around him, he's one of the most curious people I've ever met in my life. And I think it would be easy to assume, if you're a human that wants to start a podcast or be a writer or do whatever, that you have to know everything, or be this source of wisdom or philosophical magicry. Rogan, to me, he's obviously a very intelligent human and funny, but he's also like so curious that it almost enables him to be the best interviewer that's ever lived, because he's genuinely gives a shit, and he's like a little, like you said, he's like a little kid for information.
Yeah, it's true, man. It is true. And he's a genuinely caring, thoughtful person, and it comes through in what he does. And he is a good friend. Like, he's a good person. And that, I think that comes through. And what happens when people want to judge him from the outside, or judge him by however they decide, whatever kind of prism they get to look into his world. The great thing about him is that he puts it all out there 3 hours at a time, and if you want to know who he is, it's right there. I mean, it's having known him through the years. If you have an opinion about him and you've never listened to his show, it's all right there. If you really want to get educated on who he is, it is literally, there's no fakeness. He doesn't put on airs for his show. I think I've been on it 4 times now. Literally, it's almost like we're not even recording a show. Quite often there's, every time I'm in there's booze and weed and cigars and all kinds of awful things. But I've been in every one of his studios, from when he was in LA, when it was a tiny little room. It was smaller than the room I'm in right now, and to his most recent one in Austin. That's fairly palatial, and he's always been the same person throughout all of that,
which is
and so
amazing. It's damn near impossible to do at that level, right?
Yeah.
To maintain that authenticity and just that genuineness. What a privilege that you've had to sort of, and I've heard him do it so many times, even today, even still today. If he likes somebody, he's so encouraging of them. And that is one of the things he does. You should start a podcast. I've heard him do it 4, 5, 6 times. You should start a podcast. Well, even, dude, what's so funny about that story coming full circle, I listened to a portion of your show that you did with him here a month ago or whatever. And you're like, yeah, I might start a new podcast. He's like, come on, bitch, start it. Like, what are you waiting for? And so, like, talk about a story coming full circle again. Here he is. And now you have a new show, right?
Yeah. And that's actually, we started my new show first couple episodes. We took that clip and put it at the beginning of the show.
That's right. Oh, that's where I heard it. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, come on, bitch. I was like, okay. Okay, buddy.
Now, you spent at least the portion of time that I've known you, a lot of it as someone who's not real scared of saying what's on their mind, you know? Yeah. And I've always looked at you, obviously, as a friend, but obviously also as someone who's not scared to seek other opinions or challenge the opinions of anybody. And I've respected that about you because we come from an industry, for those that, because this show kind of spans across industries, I hope. For those that don't know, the hunting industry, you know, obviously it's highly dominantly male, you know, pretty heavy dose of Republican influence, obviously, you know, and that's all great and good. But one of the mistakes we all make as an industry is kind of talking to each other and not ever seeking to understand other points of views. And I've always respected that. But sometimes it's kind of hit you right square in the nose, huh?
Yeah, I mean, as you would expect, you know, I was talking about this on another podcast the other day. I've never been really good at authority. I don't deal well with authority in any form, like really. And when I got into the industry for a while, I never questioned some of the dogma, some of the orthodoxies, some of the things that you're just told. It's hunting, it's this way, right? And, you know, if you're a professional in the industry, to speak up or speak out or speak your mind, quite often you put yourself in peril professionally, your reputation or how you might be seen in the industry. And I just don't do well with those orthodoxical like ideas. Like, you have to say this, you have to think like this. I want to question those things, not because I want to push against anything that I love or believe in to damage it. I push against it to make it better. You know, it
almost seems like it raises a flag in your brain where you're like, yeah, you're saying that's what I have to say. Because I can share a little bit with the way you feel. Like, I've always struggled with authority too. If someone says that I have to do something, then it's almost worse than if they just, I don't know, like it automatically makes me kind of want to revolt from what was just said, even if it's the right thing to do. Just because I'm like, wait a minute, why are you saying that to me? Are you trying to control me? You can't control me. So it's like, I feel that, like,
yeah.
And there is a lot of that in the hunting industry. This is how we feel, and this is how you should feel. And it's like,
right.
Well, maybe it's not so easy.
Yeah. I mean, it's never going to be easy. And if you care about it, you'll question. If you care about your own beliefs, you'll question them, and you'll allow other people that you trust to question them as well. You have to. Life is colorless and dull if you don't. I mean, it's just the reality of it. If you live in a house where everyone thinks the same thing and never questions the way you see the world or the paradigms that you believe in, it's just freaking boring and dangerously in the gun world, in the hunting world, in the industry I've been in for 15 years. If you don't question what the orthodoxy is or question what the approach is, it's never going to get better. And we all know the more people that accept hunting, accept guns and the Second Amendment as valuable things for society, the better we're off we're going to be no matter what. And so I've been told to shut up a ton, and I'm not going to.
What is the biggest fight right now? What do you like? What's keeping you up at night?
Yeah, I think, you know, I'll tell you what, I think we're getting better. One of the things that keeps me up at night is kind of when we see progress. I'll give you an example of kind of what happens, and this is a situation where I kind of see both sides. Well, back in the day, not back in the day, 6 years ago, I got invited to be on the board of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, and to me, it was like, oh, this is a public land organization for advocates, for people that want to go and do good for public lands. For the first couple of years of BHA, everybody was fully on board. There was very little pushback to that organization, and the membership shot up. We killed some very damaging and degrading legislation in many states as a group of people passionate about public lands, and it really wasn't about anything other than that. We were able to do things like, I mean, I was riding along, so we is a rough term, but BHA was able to do things like bring in Patagonia. Patagonia has a lot of beliefs that I disagree with, but you know what? We know where we agree: public lands. So should we tell them to go away, or should we bring them in? So BHA was able to bridge that gap, bring in Yvon Chouinard, have him be a part of the rendezvous. And so to me, it was always like, why would we not bridge those gaps where we can? I understand that when I sit down with Yvon Chouinard, him and I are not going to agree on predator hunting, bar none, full stop. He doesn't want it. He doesn't want any predators to be killed or managed by hunters. I do. I want to have that argument with him. It's an important one. And again, he may have changed his tune, but Patagonia, the company, right? Patagonia, the company that he represents and founded, has said some pretty inflammatory things about our model of conservation and how hunters play a role. To me, I can live in a world, a dualistic world where that exists, but I also embrace that we share a passion for public lands. And I can also call them out when I think they're wrong. And over time, like, we've seen folks trying to pull that back a little bit. We've seen a lot of social media chatter, a lot of industry chatter, not only against BHA, but against this idea that there can be hunters from all walks of life. Hunters that vote Democrat, hunters that vote Republican, hunters that are independent people and just confused on which issues that they should find to be most important. So that pushback keeps me up at night, because it's stopping us from helping folks to understand what hunting is and how it values society, and also bringing new people in and making a comfortable place for them to walk in the door and not feel like they have to believe a certain type of political ideology to be accepted. I think anyone that wants to hunt should be able to vote and think the way they want to think. And we take that opportunity, if you disagree with that way that they think, to help educate them, rather than to call them out and talk down to them. So that's what's happening in our industry, not only on kind of the shadowy corners of social media, but within the industry. This is happening. So it's something that I never believe is going to be constructive. And I'm my arrows are pointed a different direction. They're pointed at bringing in new hunters and creating healthy advocates that are informed and care about conservation. So but people are pulling it the other way. I don't know if you agree with that, but I think people are pulling it the other direction.
No, I think it spans obviously much beyond hunting. It seems like it's the same thing that's happening in the world abroad has just trickled down into the industry that we've worked in for a while. It's this, you're either red or blue and there's nothing in between. And you either agree with me or you're wrong. I don't agree. I don't agree with everything that any organization has done. I can't name one organization or company that I agree with everything that they've done.
Yeah.
Right. So in this world, just like in your life, there's like gives and takes and pushes and pulls, and like it's like any relationship. You got to learn how to kind of it's not play the game as much as it is just nothing's gonna be perfect, but if you can find commonalities and that you can align with for the greater good of the future, and great. But that's a hard line to pull, especially in the age of, you know, cancel culture and social media and the deepest depths of forums in the hunting industry. You know,
Yeah.
it's hard to do. It's much easier, and it takes a lot less effort to kind of just go along with picking a side and, like, you know, being like, I am totally this or I'm totally not that. I fall into it all the time. I tend to, I mean, my political leanings are much more conservative than my wife's, for example, but we always have, and we've been married now for a long time, almost 15 years, and we can have conversations almost every night. This happens where I don't agree with what she's saying, and she does not agree with what I'm saying, and probably never will, but we can talk about it for an hour and still, you know, go to bed, give each other a kiss, say I love you, and maybe find a few things in the middle that we can be like, yeah, no, I hear what you're saying there. Okay, I would agree with that, but A, B, C, X, Y, Z, as opposed to you're wrong, I'm right, and getting in a big fight.
Yeah. Yeah, that we've seen, like, our discourse, the public discourse is kind of just like has fallen into what you just the example that you just gave.
Yeah,
it's fallen into this who's right, who's wrong. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I tend to try to hit both sides of the political spectrum when I do, and I will listen to, for example, Ben Shapiro, and every episode is about how the libs are ruining the world. I'm like, are you just trying to piss people off? Is that all this is? Is there no credit to be given to the libs? It's like, do they never do anything right?
Oh, I know.
They got to do something right. Because I'm with you, man. My politics are, like, incredibly libertarian. I love that I live in Montana and I can gamble, buy liquor, and buy weed in basically the same street. I like those freedoms. I don't think, you know, I like my Second Amendment freedoms and my rights to bear arms. Those are things that I don't feel as though the government, they have an incredibly high burden of proof to take those rights away from me and restrict them in any way. So those are things that I believe, but they're only my beliefs. That's not me. If the door is wide open for me, for a vegan or an animal rights person, or somebody who is anti-gun, to walk through the door and make a good point. I would welcome them to do that.
Well, and it's actually what you focus your world around now. I mean, you literally have a vegan that is on your podcast pretty frequently, right?
Yeah, we have a show called Hunter and Vegan where him and we spent about 8 episodes. We just did like an 8-chapter breakdown of our disagreements and sat on a call like this one. Do you guys remain friends to this day? Yeah, we're gonna be hanging out tomorrow in California.
Amazing.
He's awesome. He's great, dude. Like, we're not gonna go hunting, and we're not gonna. But, like, I was going to his hometown to do something else, and he's like, "You want to stay on my couch, dude? Like, my apartment is humble, but you can stay on my couch." I'm like, I gotta stay in an Airbnb because I don't want to catch the vegan. Whatever, I don't want to get vegan. I don't. Maybe if I stay on your couch, you'll be able to trick me, and I'll become a vegan. I don't know. And he laughs at that kind of shit. Like, we're able to give each other all the shit that any friend would give another friend. And he, if you would ask him, and I've pressed him on this, would like to see hunting end tomorrow if he could have that. And I would love to see animal rights ideologies end tomorrow. So it is just like the world doesn't need to be bifurcated in that way. You could just hang out with people, even if you disagree with them. One interesting thing I wanted to talk to you about was, the public lands conversation over the last 10 years has become more and more popular because one of the greatest threats to hunting is access, right? Right. But I've always found it interesting that, again, people seem to divide themselves into 2 groups. One group is public land only. And if you hunt private land, you're a loser. And you are against public lands. How dare you? And it's like, well, hold on. Wait a minute. Let's break this down. Okay? Settle down. It's possible that you can also be for public lands, but also take an opportunity to hunt on a ranch. And guess what? And this is just my opinion. Tell me if I'm wrong. Guess what? A lot of the animals that are hunted on public land, part of their habitat
is on private land. You'll notice that a lot of public land hunters hunt the borders of ranches. The reason they do that is because a lot of times animals can grow older or survive longer because they have this private land below, or maybe it's their wintering ground or whatever. My point is like, it's possible to be both. Surprise! It's not that easy.
I should host a show called "It's Possible to Be Both." You can do it.
Tell me where I'm wrong there.
No, you're not wrong.
That one's always driven me crazy. It's like, you hunt on a ranch, you are the devil.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one thing that I've been preaching a lot, and I do sometimes sound preachy when I talk about this, but it's true, is that if you care about a community, and hunting is like, I tell people, if I died tomorrow, 50%, 60% of my funeral would be folks from the hunting world. Mm-hmm. Like it's my life. I care about the people. I care about the industry itself. I care about the commerce. I care about conservation and all of it. It's all I think about. And I care about it enough to say, look, if we are in raising up advocates for hunting or public lands that are blind ideologues, we got to go, no, let's reverse that. Like, there's going to be dualities in all this stuff. So if the fervor for public land advocacy turns someone into what you're talking about, an anti-private land individual, we got to go, hey, come back. Whoa. Like, we're all stakeholders in these ecosystems. You've lived in Montana. Like, we owe everything to landowners like Ted Turner. They harbor these elk. They feed them. They have the most pristine ecosystems. They quite often have, land without fences for miles and miles, and they don't pressure these elk. And they essentially take care, and as you said, they feed and harbor them until we want to play around with them in September up in the mountains. This is the reality. So when we come to the table every year to debate our regulations and to go to the state legislatures and talk about what we feel like is the right way to manage our wildlife, we have to do so understanding that we probably don't understand what a large ranch owner's needs are unless we ask them and say, like, you own private land. You are a stakeholder in this process. What do you need? I'm a public landowner. I live in a development. I hunt all public land, but I need to know what you need because my opinion needs to be educated by your point in this process. And
demonizing them is only going to make the conversation harder to make work, right? If you just say you own a ranch, oh, you're awful. How could you do that? Don't you support public lands? Well, it's like, if you're in his head, you're thinking, well, my family's owned this ranch for 5 years. I didn't choose to. I grew up here. I raise cattle for a living or whatever. Sheep is another hot topic right now with, but to your point, they also have an opinion and a point of view, whether you agree with it, their lifestyle or whatever. There's lots to criticize from private landowners, and there's lots to criticize from total 100% public land people too. We can all be criticized, but if you go into that conversation just demonizing the other side right off the bat, it's going to go nowhere because that just turns people off, pisses them off, and they would just want to give you the middle finger. Especially if you own a big ranch, you're like, okay, fine, I'll just go back to my 20,000 acres, and you go have fun in that public land, buddy. I don't care. What are you going to do to me?
Seriously. What are you going to do? Yeah, I got more power than you. Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
Or they'll be total assholes like happened in central Montana 10, 15 years ago. They'll build fences on the back of their ranch so they all can't get out, which is awful and shouldn't happen. But my point is there's got to be some gives and takes for the overall goal or objective. You've worked in big companies. This is the same in the business world. Gosh, I mean, I sit in meetings every day with some of the companies I'm working with where if you have 5 or 6 people in the room, you're automatically going to have differing opinions on some decision that you're trying to make. And so the only way that you can actually make the decision is if you define what the overall long-term goal for the company is. Right. And then you go, okay, I don't agree with what you're saying, but I hear you. And I think this middle road is probably the best thing for the company. So you got to give up your ego just for a second, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big one. Me, man, I have a book right here. I keep it close to me. I sleep with it's my pillow every night.
I need to read that. I actually haven't read that one.
It's a good one. I'm on my second turn with it, but this is the truth, man. And some things that frustrate me. I just had this happen on my podcast where a gentleman came on and was comparing the NRA to QAnon, right? Everyone is trying to characterize the polarization and make that the reality, right? Take this issue, right? You could watch the show Yellowstone and see it in real time. As the writer of Yellowstone, his name escapes me, but he lived in the Paradise Valley here close to me, and he understands those things, but he's writing a drama, right? So he's characterizing the sides, right? He's characterizing the sides as these incredibly different people who could almost never come together. And most folks, if you hear someone doing that, if they have a podcast, they have a TV show, if you hear someone doing that, taking the fringe or taking the polarized ideologue from the left, the right, public land, private land, and making that a character for the entire set of people, turn it off. Just turn it off. Or recognize it and go find the opposite. Go find the opposite. The definition of a demagogue is a political figure that uses half-truths to convince you that they're right. So there's so much demagoguery going on throughout our industry, as you mentioned earlier, like our industry, the larger media sect. There's so many people giving you half of the truth because it fits their narrative, that it's just on the listener, the media consumer, to go, no, the NRA is not QAnon. Like, let's put that away for a second. The NRA has the Hunter Services Division. They have Eddie the Eagle, where they teach kids gun safety. For Christ's sakes, literally the rules for gun safety came from the NRA. And so let's calm down for a second and stop trying to make characters out of the crazy fringe groups.
Yeah, I wonder why we do that. I wonder if it's, something evolutionarily that we have, like, our brain can't handle it. Otherwise it makes us too uncomfortable. So like we have to package things, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you have one side, like, just think of, there's just few speakers in our world that I like. Bill Maher, I like, because Bill Maher will call woke people out like that.
Yeah.
He'll be like, dude, I believe in the Democratic Party. I'm a Democrat. This show's a left-wing show. But when woke people do dumb shit, he calls them out. And that's really, I think what happens is you play on people, they call it the political base, right? But people just play on a group of folks who are easily encouraged, easily scared, and follow these narratives, really without question. And that's a shame to me, because there's a whole lot of really cool things and cool people and cool ideas to listen to. And you can't do that if you got somebody in your ear telling you that those folks are all evil and they all want to take your rights away, no matter which side it is.
What is the most important fight right now in hunting? Like, what we've talked about, obviously being divided and characterizing people, demonizing people, and not getting anywhere with anything. But like, what is the thing that we need to get somewhere?
Yeah. There's been a long time. I mean, this is decades long. The Humane Society of the United States, HSUS, is an organization that sounds really nice. Humane.
They're being humane.
They are a society of humane people, which I love humane people, and they're from the United States. I love that too. They are a rabid anti-hunting group. And again, when I say anti-hunting, I mean, I've encouraged folks, when I can speak to them, to say, when I say anti-hunting, I separate this idea of anti-hunting legislation and anti-hunting thought. I am, as I've said, I'm all for talking to animal rights folks. I've done it. I'm friends with a vegan guy. Anti-hunting thought, I welcome that debate. Anti-hunting legislation, we need to kick that in the nuts. Like that is, we should be able to separate those things. We should be able to have a discourse with people we disagree with, all the while making sure that we're protecting the thing that we love. We can do both at the same time. And so HSUS has for years systematically gone to states with more liberal leaning politics. The state you live in is a huge one: Oregon, California, New Jersey, Colorado, and now have expanded those tactics in pretty much every state that has any sort of predator hunting. So they systematically attack the fringes of hunting, right? Like the things that only few of us like to do, or fewer of us like to do. And then
the ones that are harder to understand, a little bit more controversial, right? Bears, wolves.
Yep, they're chipping away, right? And we've seen this with COVID as well. Like people push, these folks that want to take away your rights, they push until you push back, and then they wait a little bit. Mm-hmm. They push a little bit more, and then they wait. And they push a little bit more, and then they wait. And so that's what HSUS has been doing for years. And for years, the Sportsman's Alliance has been really the only group in our space, along with SCI and some others, but the Sportsman's Alliance on a state-by-state level, because that's where this battle happens, the Sportsman's Alliance has really been the only group doing this. And they do it they've done it for years in a fairly quiet way. But one of the great things about social media is we've been able to gather around, there's a ban in Washington State on the spring bear season. We've been able to gather around that. There is almost yearly at this point anti-bear hunting legislation in California. We've already seen they stopped mountain lion hunting in California. There is Governor Phil Murphy years ago, and a couple of years ago when he was elected in New Jersey, banned bear hunting on state lands. And there's a big push there. So that's happening. That's been happening for years, but now we're able to gather around those things on social media. There's a new group called Howl for Wildlife. I've talked to those guys a little bit. They've kind of automated the way that you can contact your officials and organized in a way that we hadn't before as a community. And so I think that's the biggest thing right now, as we're able to, not that this is a new fight, but people are able to step in the fight and understand it a little bit more, because man, it is complicated. It is hard.
I vividly remember when they shut down bear and cougar hunting with dogs and bait in Oregon, because it was the year before that I could legally hunt, and it broke my heart. It was 1991. Yeah. And it seems like, to your point, these organizations that, this is kind of what I was talking about. Like, their goal is to shut down all hunting, right? Yep. And even internally, they may not agree with how to get there, but they're aligned on that goal. Therefore, they're like, okay, we got to settle down on some of this other stuff. Let a few years go by when it's a little bit more popular in the public. Right now, we're going to focus on mountain lions, which everybody loves a furry kitten. Like, look at them in a tree. The dogs are barking like they fall out.
It's mean.
It's super mean, and bears. Predators specifically have this interesting, it's just people just get prickled right up about predators. And I understand it. I guess we're kind of, we grow up with teddy bears and little kittens and stuff, but it doesn't make total sense to me, because I think baby elk are cute and deer are cute. Maybe it's the meat part of it. Like, they don't understand that you can eat some of these things. What do you think it is?
It's, like I said, when I was asking these questions to my animal rights buddy, Robert C. Jones, and he's a doctor of animal ethics. I don't know if he's a doctor. He's a doctor, and he's a professor of animal ethics. But at the same time, he teaches a class at Chico State University on animal ethics. And I think that's where, I think a lot of ways you're right. We do really personalize and anthropomorphize these animals in a way that's unhealthy. And I have kids, you have kids. Some of that is okay. Like when I watch Nat Geo and they have a panther, and they film a wild panther in some national park, and they give it a name, and then it has friends and it's running around, and then all of a sudden it's eating an antelope. But that antelope didn't have a name or friends, and Nat Geo just skipped that part. I think that's okay at some level. It's okay to do with kids, but at some point we have to stop being kids about this. We have to go, okay, what is the imperative we have? We have a biological imperative to eat. Number one, we're biological creatures, and so unless we change that, we got to consume the world around us. Number two, we have the ability, given our evolution, to intelligently intervene with the natural world, not to go in there with a billy club and start whacking shit whenever it's inconvenient for us. We can intelligently intervene and manage any wildlife population as we so choose. If only we could agree on it. And so I think that there is a lot of, we have just not been able to break the very emotional barrier of how easy it is to see a thing and give it its emotions, give it the same kind of, behavior as we have, and then forget about the fact that it'll rip the throat out of an elk. And this is very much the nature's metal movement, isn't it? Like, this is very much, that is in response to this. Yeah.
To follow.
Great account. Go follow it. You probably do already if you listen.
I do. Yeah.
I do too. But that's the nature's metal movement in its holistic sense. It's people saying, hey, look, you can't have your cake and eat it too on this. These animals are beautiful. We respect them. We want to intervene on their behalf in natural processes and make sure that we manage and cohabitate with them. But at the same time, we have to understand them for what they are to achieve that management, to achieve that understanding of how we cohabitate. We can't act like hunting and killing a mountain lion and eating it is the worst thing in the world. But at the same time, if it's in your backyard, you want somebody to come over and shoot it, kill it. Like that, you can't have it both ways. You have to understand that dichotomy. And so I think that'll just be something that we, urbanization has only ever accelerated in this country. And I would always just say, like, if you live in Anaconda, Montana, and you live in, say, like Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, if you take somebody from Anaconda, Montana, which is a tiny town here in western Montana, and you go to Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, and pluck somebody out of there, and you put them together and be like, agree on things. Like, good luck, man. It's not going to happen.
Right.
And so it should be our job to help them understand each other, but oftentimes we don't get there. So I do think that's the battle in the predator space.
Yeah. What is the argument for no predator hunting that you're hearing the most right now? Like, what are they leaning on right now? Because they had a pretty significant win in Washington a few months ago that got overturned, though, correct? Or at least it's in the process of maybe being overturned.
It's in the process of maybe being overturned. I'd have to check in with the guys that track that on a daily basis. But yeah, there's definitely, we've had a lot of success in the comment periods to get it back under review. I don't know where it stands exactly right now.
What's the narrative that they're pushing, though, that like what got to people's hearts on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. The narrative they're pushing there is that you're hunting them when they're the narrative that they might push is that you're hunting them when they're stumbling out of their dens and they're woozy. No, that's part of it. You're hunting them spring bear season. Bears are vulnerable. Bears are
hungry.
Hungry. They're having cubs, and essentially they're using this wildlife management tactic of, you do no harm, right? You could do harm in the spring if you shoot a sow that has new cubs. We've all seen this as bear hunters. You see a bear pop out on a ridge. If it's spot and stalk, you're looking and you're waiting to see those cubs. You're waiting to see those cubs. And so that's how they go, how HSUS win at that argument. Certainly in the state of Washington, our wildlife managers, our state wildlife biologists, the wildlife agencies there are disagree with the ending of the season. They have looked at the data for harvest rates, and they've looked at the data for how many sows that have been killed, and they believe, and they've argued this from the beginning, and this is where our model of conservation comes in. These are the folks we should entrust. These are the folks we have entrusted. We hire state wildlife biologists. We pay them with their tax dollars to help us make these decisions in as scientific a way as possible. And in the state of Washington, we lost that for a moment. We may get it back, but for a moment we lost it because HSUS had more power, and the Wildlife Commission had folks that were influenced by that. And so it's a representation game at some point.
What's the most powerful argument against their narrative?
I mean, you let the wildlife managers tell you, the wildlife biologists tell you that the number of sows killed is, I think it's definitely below 10. It's definitely in the single digits. And the wildlife biologists are saying, we need this season to manage these bears. We understand the population is at a healthy level. We can take this many bears out of that population and maintain its health. Mm-hmm. This is a useful tool for wildlife managers, and we shouldn't take it away from them. Like this is what the biologists in that state have argued from the beginning. And you can go there and you can read their arguments, which I had back in January when this was happening. You can go and read how they articulated this. They have all the numbers. They understand, how many sows have been killed, cub recruitment. They go through all of these issues and they say, look, we as the wildlife biologists of the state of Washington believe that this is a useful tool of the many tools that we have to manage these populations.
This is an interesting one. This is another good example of data is really good as long as it supports my narrative, but if it doesn't, it's no good anymore. It's like, it's fake news, right? And both sides of the political spectrum do this, obviously, but it drives me crazy with these anti-hunting groups that all of a sudden scientists are bad now. Because I mean, you've met these biologists are not like, and I'm overgeneralizing, folks. Okay, calm down. Yeah. But this is not an overly Trump crowd. This is oftentimes biologists are very intellectual, kind of introverted, they're not super controversial. I mean, they're literally scientists. They're out there every day. They're the ones we pay with taxpayer dollars that we depend upon their data to make educated decisions on wildlife, right?
Yeah.
And so it drives me crazy. It drives me crazy when we get to these debates and it's like, well, you're presenting me that your data makes sense, but still it's bad. We should ban it.
Yeah. I mean, that's it. I mean, in like, if you look at the Washington issue back in November, there was a committee hearing and they hear public comments. And I want to say, I'd have to look it up. I want to say there's like 100 folks that spoke and 90 of those 100 people spoke in favor of banning the bear hunt. And that was because HSUS is really good at what they do. That wasn't because there was 90 concerned citizens, although I'm sure there were some sprinkled in there, if we're being honest. And so they're making the argument that I was just describing. The bears emerge from their dens in a vulnerable state, and we can orphan these cubs. And then the wildlife biologists come back and go, no, we have the numbers on this. Every bear that gets shot in this thing, and I just did this in Wyoming last year, every bear that gets shot, we make people bring it to us and we check it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's actually, it's a super strenuous process.
Yeah, like this is a process where we bring in money for state wildlife management. This is a process that's under incredible scrutiny in terms of is it good for the wildlife population? And we trust that state wildlife biologists, although they're people too and they're flawed, that they would step forward if they felt that the concerns of folks that wanted to ban this hunt were valid. And most of the commentary from the wildlife biologists in the state was to say that while we understand the risks of orphaning cubs and killing sows and hunting these bears right out of our dens, we believe that that's a small risk. And it's a very transparent process, at least in my opinion, of how they got to that. And so it just goes to show you, man, somebody can step in and upend our system of wildlife management, not easily, but fairly easily, in terms of how we manage our wildlife. So it's a little scary.
For sure. It's totally scary. And I've always been of the opinion that the greatest danger, or let's see, hunting. The reason we should try to at least seek to understand these people or have conversations, you don't have to agree with them, is the future of hunting, unfortunately, lies in the metropolitan areas. And like in my state, Oregon, the future of hunting in Oregon is super scary. It depends on Portland and what people in Portland think, because what people in Portland think, unfortunately, is what determines most of our policies. And they're Portland and Eugene. Those are our two biggest cities in Oregon. So, I mean, I certainly probably disagree with a lot of the sentiment around hunting from those folks who live in those cities, at least statistically. But I also should be smart enough to know that that's where it's coming from. Therefore, that's where the fights are. The fights aren't, fighting with your buddy over who shot the biggest bull, or who hunts public land or private land, or who shoots a compound and who shoots a recurve, or whatever. Like, I've been seeing a bunch of crap on social media bashing meat eaters' turkey calls, or, whatever. Like, it's all this infighting. The fight isn't there. The fight is in the places you don't want to go to because you're scared of hearing different opinions.
Yeah, man. And I think that these issues we're talking about, this one Washington bear hunt issue is so complex. I am speaking about it in generalities. Like, I don't fully understand what's actually going on in the ground. But I know, as I look at it as a layman in terms of the state politics there, because I don't live there, I know that when I look at, there's like I remember looking at a 35 slide presentation that went through historical reasoning for the black bear hunt, all the numbers, all the data, super easy to understand. And that came from our state wildlife officials. And if you listen to our North American model of conservation and you study it and read it as I do, this is the outcome that we want. We want our biologists to be looking at this objectively and going, it's working. We've been doing it since 1969. Let's keep doing it. That if you're going to spend your time on something, I promise you the meat eater $300 turkey call, it might feel good to talk shit about it. It's going to feel good because I'm from the East Coast, man. We talk shit to each other as a language. Like I love a nice shit talk session. I usually do it to people that I care about the most. I don't talk shit to people I don't know because I don't know how they'll take it. But I understand how fun it is to talk shit and make memes and do all. It's a good time sometimes. But if you really care about our wildlife resources, there are so many things that you could be doing that are more productive.
Yeah.
Than that. I mean, just is, and I think the folks that are doing that know that already. I mean, they're no dummies. They know that, that they're being assholes. They know.
I want to switch gears a little bit because I'm curious about this. You have lived a very unconventional life, it seems like. And if you're like me, you probably have a lot of friends that don't totally understand it. They're like, do you work or do you just go hunting and like bullshit to a microphone and like hanging out with Rogan and like you're just do you get some of that? And second part of the question is where was that tipping point where you knew that you wanted to live sort of an unconventional existence?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it always goes, like I said, it goes back to I don't like authority. That's one way to put it, but I also don't like doing things the way that other people are doing them. And I'm not perfect in that regard. There's people I admire and I try to, chase what they've created in a lot of ways. So that's not holistically how I approach it, but I've been lucky enough to see people in my own life be fully, and this is the people that I admire the most, fully themselves. They dress a different way. They talk a different way. They are who they are. And in this day and age where everyone feels like the need to self-censor and a little bit scared to speak, those are the people I admire. I admired them before the age of cancel culture. I admired artists as a kid who were who they were. And, and then, I mean, imagine like Madonna. If Madonna wasn't famous, she'd be a weirdo, but she just was lucky enough to get famous for being who she is.
There's that saying, you're an idiot until you're a genius.
Yeah. And so that's one thing that has always driven me from the very beginning. And I think having the mind of a journalist, I never focused it on myself. I always focused on, I want to tell the story of somebody who's living life this way. I want to tell a story of someone who has captured this feeling. And from the early days in our industry, I've tried to do that. I remember writing articles about, one of the first features I ever did was about Ian Harrison, who was a British guy who won Top Shot, which is a show no one will remember.
I remember it.
Probably. You remember it?
Oh, yeah.
All the kids probably like, Top Shot, what's that?
Yeah.
It was on History Channel. I watched. I'm like, this dude, man, this dude is different. He's good at his craft. He presents himself in a like exciting and different way. Became friends with him. I called him on the phone, said, I wanted to write an article about you. Wrote an article, and the guys at American Rifleman at the NRA were nice enough to publish it. And as a young writer, man, that's what gave me real energy. And so I kind of continued seeking that out. And that's what brought me to Steve Bernella early on. That's what brought me to Joe Rogan. That's what brought me to many of the people that I have been lucky enough to call friends, but also they're heroes of mine, and people that I greatly admire for what they've done and who they are. And I don't know. I think maybe if I had to self-analyze that, that's part of the reason why I've gotten to be around those folks, is because I see it that way. You know, I admire those folks that are doing it differently.
There's one thing I learned about Rogan right off the bat was his knack for seeing through bullshit is unbelievable. Unbelievable. Like if you're not genuine, he can see through it in like 5 milliseconds.
And that's why, like, when folks are trying to cancel him, what I would say is, like, look, he's so intellectually mature. He's so grounded. He knows who he is. And those are the things I admire about him. Like, if he didn't have a show, I wouldn't give a shit. What I admire about him is he understands how to approach life in a way that works for him. And that's what he's going to do. And I think that allows him to have that barometer on other folks. He can see that in you immediately when you walk in the room. Are you living your life that way? No matter if you've been successful or you're still working on it, or, you know, you're incredibly, you know, you have a lot of self-doubt, but as long as you can understand who you are and what drives you and allow that to be, it's something you're working on. Nobody's, you know, I've had a great career and I have a wonderful life, but I wake up every day and go, I need to do better. I got to do better. If I don't do something productive today, I might as well just cash it in. And that's how I think of it every day. So I've seen other folks that are incredibly successful have the same mindset. And again, like I said, as a journalist, I try my best to focus on other people and think about their story. So I'm not often thinking about my own.
It seems like that trait of you being unapologetically you. I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs and just inspiring people, and it seems like that's one of the common traits that I always see is like, and I've noticed it in my own life because I've struggled with all the same things we all do. Like when you're younger, you're trying to be like everybody else. You're trying to fit in. You're trying to be cool. But it seems like every year you get older, you worry a little bit less and less and less. Like, and for me, it started happening when if you have a couple like significant losses in your life, like, and you realize how fleeting life is and how much of the bullshit you spent your time worrying about when really it doesn't matter at all. It started happening, but also as I've just gotten older, it seems like my happiness level it runs in parallel to how much I can just be myself and be comfortable in my own skin. And the more and more that happens, the more and more happier I am. And also the cooler things happen to you because people sniff that out. People love being around authentic people. Like, I mean, it's just the way it is. People they don't want to be, I mean, maybe some people do, I guess, but not people I want to be around. Some people if you're ever around like an extreme narcissist, they like to place themselves around people that make them look good as opposed to actually who they like. So that's a whole nother topic and maybe a whole nother podcast. But if you're actually seeking like real relationships, it seems like, and I struggle with it obviously, but I really consciously try to work on it, is like the more unapologetically you are, the more of an original life you're going to live, and the more like awesome people you're going to attract. And it seems like that's kind of what you did. You know, that picture you took of Rogan, or I mean, Sam Soholt took the picture, but that I remember when that cover came out. In fact, I was at Sitka and I put it on my wall because he was wearing Sitka pants. He was wearing our Timberline pants, and I used to put all the covers we got on my wall next to my desk. And that was such a powerful moment. I know also in Sam's life, and I'm going to have him on the podcast because I want to talk to him too, because another great example of, you know, being unapologetically you to the point where you live in a damn bus, and you know, and you're so passionate about, you know, public lands that you're making a living selling T-shirts and being a photographer and doing all these things. Whole nother story, but I think it's admirable, you know, that you're like not scared to be yourself, not scared to voice your opinion, not scared to talk to other the people with different points of views, not scared to end one phase of a podcast and start a whole nother podcast that's really interesting. We'll talk about that more, but I think it's cool, man. I've always been stoked watching your story.
Yeah, there was somebody said to me, somebody I knew sent me a message on Instagram. I've known him for years, and like you and I really do. I look at like contemporaries in the space that I love so much, like people that are contemporaries. You know, people in their 30s that I've known for a decade because we've been in the hunting industry for that long. That's where I really look, and I'm like, man, I hope I can get those folks respect. I hope at least they see what I'm trying to do. That's somebody that I really respect and admire. Send me a message like, man, you're doing it your way. And as the first time when you get up every morning and you work your ass off, you don't sit around and think, hey, I'm doing it my way, guys. You're just doing your best with every decision. And that was the time where I was like, man, that is, of all the things anyone said, mean, nice, agnostic to me, like that is the thing. When somebody that knows the space, knows the people, knows the struggles, can say like, you're doing it your way. And maybe someone else, I've had folks come to me and say, I started a podcast because of you. And sometimes I have to sit back and be like, what? Like, that's insane, man. But those things are every once in a while. It's nice to stop and recognize those things. But I've learned from the folks that are real successful that don't stop for too long, only a moment, and then keep on going.
Well, and that's the beauty of if you're like being unapologetically you and focusing on things that like energize you, you won't want to stop for very long because you'll want to. You're like so fascinated and passionate about what you're doing. And I don't like it when people say I haven't worked a day in my life, and you know it doesn't even feel like work. It's bullshit. It feels like work, but
work is work.
It feels like work. But what I was going to say is, it almost seems like, you know, if, right now it's March 10th, the Ukraine-Russia thing's happening right now, and I watch it every night. Super depressing, but I try to do it just so I could stay up on it. But one of the things I think about is, in America, it almost seems like an obligation to take advantage of the freedom that we have to be unapologetically you. And it seems like almost like a huge miss if you don't take advantage of that in some capacity. Obviously, Rogan has taken the bull by the horns at the ultimate capacity, right? Say whatever the fuck he wants, whenever the hell he wants, and he's fine. But the rest of us can go, man, freedom is an unbelievable thing, but it's also fleeting. And it was really hard to earn. I don't know. I've really, I take it for granted. That's for sure. And I also take for granted how rich we all are, not necessarily financially, but pretty much are financially, compared to the rest of the world, but more about rich with opportunity to have experiences that most people don't have. Yeah. So I just think about that when I'm looking at a story like yours or anybody else that's kind of blazed their own path. It inspires me to be like, what else can I do with the rest of my life? Gosh, I have such a huge opportunity just to enjoy it and try new things. I
always try to place myself on the knife's edge if I can. You know, part of taking risks and part of, just learning who you are is those conflicts in your life. How do you you put yourself in a position where you're either going to fail or succeed, and then learn from it. Those risks are key. I made a little sign here in my office that just says the obstacle is the way, and that is, and
Good
even
book.
it's a good book, another Ryan Holiday book that he's everywhere in my room here. But I do, and I don't talk about that much. I don't say, hey, this is where I read these books. I just think that's a personal thing. Folks can be inspired any way they want to be inspired. But the obstacle is the way is one of those things where even in this idea of to be unapologetically yourself, you got to figure out who you are. And that there's a lot of obstacles in the world to figuring out who you actually want to be. And that's always shifting. And that's one of the things with cancel culture that is so disappointing is that we don't leave room for that growth. We don't leave room for what we are today and what we were. We could never be what we are today if we weren't struggling to get better as a nation, as a people, and as individuals. And so I've seen that in the hunting space. I've interviewed some folks as I tried to suss these ideas out. I suss a lot of these ideas out in public. I had a young lady on my podcast who was very social justice warrior and wrote a book, Black Faces and White Spaces. And it was, I forget her name. That's awful. But we talked about, the idea that John Muir and Teddy Roosevelt and all these folks in our that we laud as heroes were also slave owners and did a lot of racist things and had a lot of racist ideas and thoughts and writings. And at the time I was listening to that going, okay, man, this is something that I need to acknowledge this and figure it out. And at the time people were kicking me around on the internet and creating dummy accounts or burner accounts to defame me and doing all kinds of crazy stuff around me just talking to this writer. And after this happened, I thought, man, I could either shut up about this and never talk about it again, or I could take this learning moment. I remember being with my dad at Thanksgiving table and saying this to him. And he goes, son, what do you think was going to happen? Did you not figure this out? Are you surprised that you had somebody on that had a lot, was talking about race and racism and identity, and you thought it was just going to go smoothly? He's like, if you're going to get in the muck and get dirty, you better just enjoy it and try to get better. And so I really did take some time to think about that conversation. Her name, now I remember, is Dr. Carolyn Finney. And I thought about my conversation with Dr. Finney. She's a very well-intended person. She has this perspective. Where do I agree? Where do I disagree? And I was able to get out of the Ben Shapiro mode about hating the woke people and think she's not wrong about the history. I think she's wrong about the approach to what we do about it. And I was able to then go back to her and write her an email, say, look, I thought about this. I appreciate you introducing the ideas in the way that you did. I disagree. I agree here. I disagree here.
Excuse me.
And that was super cool. That was cool for me personally to be able to do that. And if I was going to do it in the public, I was going to take the slings and arrows, and you can't complain about that. Can't complain about what happens if you're going to step out and have those conversations.
How do you, what's your tools to handle criticism? Obviously there's no shortage of it.
Yeah. I think everybody at first, the first time that I did something that was easily criticized, or that somebody jumped on to criticize, I did not handle it well at all. I think the human psyche is very much biased toward negative criticism. I mean, we just are. You could have 1,000 smarter people than me have said this, but 1,000 people could tell you you're the best thing ever, and one person can crush it. And there's a guy named Naval Ravikant that is a angel investor, and he's been on all the podcasts. He's a great philosopher. He says, when you get in this social media world and you create a brand around yourself, or you create a show, and then you start reading the comments, one of the things that happens is you develop this really weighty self-image, right? Your self-image is kind of you're farming it out to these other people. And if you have a weighty self-image and you don't know who you are, people can tear you down with one comment or one message board thread or one whatever. So I went through that. I read those things about me and wondered what the hell I was going to do about it. I mean, I was attacked in like national publications. It was for a while there. And so it sucked, but the way that I understood to deal with it was to not have my self-image generated from anything that happened externally. Like, I know who I am. I can tell myself, were you a good person today? And those are very important interactions you have with your colleagues, with your friends, with your family. Did you do your best? I can tell myself whether I did good or not. And that self-reflection is the way that I got out of that mindset. I got away from that, like that comment matters of that good or bad. And it's just personal agency. It's just taking personal responsibility.
How do you do that though, and know when to listen? Like, because oftentimes even the most ridiculous criticisms are rooted in some form of truth that you should. I've struggled with that. I probably don't get as much, at least right now, as you have by any means. But I'm a pretty sensitive dude. Like I want people to like me generally. I can't just be like, fuck them. Like I can on the outside, but it still bugs me. Yeah. But I've often found if I get criticized and I examine it, there's probably something I can take out of it, even if it's totally annoying and obnoxious. I can be like, okay, yeah, well, maybe I was kind of an idiot. But also there's sometimes where, like, I remember this was a few months ago, I posted something about COVID, which is a lightning rod. But I was just so annoyed one night, and I posted something on my story. I can't even remember what it was about. Oh, it was right around when Rogan was getting criticized. I think I posted something actually about that. And this guy messaged me, who follows me and seems like a nice enough guy, but he just put 4 paragraphs about how, I'm spreading misinformation, not based in scientific fact, and Rogan is awful, that he shouldn't be saying these, he shouldn't be talking about it, shut up. This guy was I can't remember if he was like an EMT or, some form of, he was in the medical profession. How about that? Mm-hmm. And my response to the guy was like, hey, thanks for the message. Thanks for taking so much time to write it. Like, but also, yeah, I'm going to say what I think. And I remember what it was. I said something like, disinformation equals something that they disagree with or something like that. Like, right. Which seems to happen on both sides of the aisle right now. It's like, that's disinformation. It's like, well, is it? Or is it just something that doesn't support your narrative? And maybe it's a half truth. Maybe that's true, but at least should we just label things disinformation that you don't agree with? And he's like, this is true disinformation. I'm like, my point back to him was, well, who determines that? Like, okay, so let's just say you're right. Fine. But the whole problem around this whole thing is like, who gets to decide what's disinformation and misinformation and all these things? It's like, if it's just one side of the aisle, that seems pretty slippery. You know where else that happens? China, Russia, Venezuela. That's when it goes to the extreme. But anyways, that, even though I knew I was pretty comfortable with my position on that, his comments still did bother me. Yeah. It made me feel like maybe it would be easier not to post your opinions, or, maybe I shouldn't do this. Maybe I should just keep my head down and, work, and don't even, like, maybe I should quit social media. That's how much it affected me, even though I knew I was comfortable with what I said.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I had so much to say about that topic, but I would say one of the things that I do is I kind of like bucket. This is just something I do on my own. I bucket my opinions, and I believe in them totally, and I believe I'm right, and I'll argue them with anybody. And then I have other opinions where I'm like, well, I'm willing to get. I'm going to put this out there as, hey, I believe this right now, but I'm hoping somebody probably kicks the door in on this. It's like, I kind of believe this, And then I have other things that I've said in the public where I'm like, man, that was a mistake, man. And somebody called me out on it. And at the time I got pissed, but then it took me a little time to realize I made a misstep. But I didn't make, I think a healthy way to go about that is not make those decisions because of an external community, of something somebody else said. You got to make that on your own. Certainly you would allow for someone to criticize you that you never met before and have that be, you know, something that kind of helps you embark on an own self-discovery that helps you understand how you were wrong. But that's a very complicated thing to do. I was reading a book by E.O. Wilson, the legendary biologist, called The Origins of Creativity. And he goes through kind of like how it's incredibly I was reading it to my kids to put them to sleep actually after a while because they like the rhythmic writing, and it's pretty funny. It's an incredibly intellectual book. E.O. Wilson is a legend, and he rest in peace. But he said we have a deluge of information and a lack of wisdom. He said it way better than that, and that's the truth, man. And I think wisdom is yours to develop. You know, that information is going to come at you. We live in an age where information is like shotgun into your face, no matter what you do. Most people wake up that I know and either like look at their phone almost immediately, and are looking at their phone until they go to bed. And so we're just in the unique position in my life, we went from sticking AOL CDs into the thing for more minutes, AOL chat rooms and shit, to like literally being able to live stream a war on just any platform you want. So we are in the position where we are in a like the information age times 10. And if you want to be able to figure it out, you gotta take in that information and try to find some wisdom as a way to process it. And I think that goes for comments as well. Like I heard Rogan say, don't read them. I'm like, I read them, dude. I'm comfortable with who I am. And every once in a while I'll read one that's like, you're a liberal blowhard. I'm like, okay. Liberal, no. Blowhard, up to you. But I came out on my podcast when I was at Meat Eater and said I voted for Joe Biden. And then like people are like, oh, how courageous. I'm like, why is that fucking courageous, man? Like that should not be courageous. It shows the symptom of where we are. I said very honestly that I struggled. I think I voted in 4 elections and I voted for 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats. So do what you want with me. I think you could probably beat me up on either end. But the reason I wanted to say it in public is because I want people to be able to say it in public, and be able to say, this is why I made this decision. I'm not, and now that I voted for Joe Biden, I'm not responsible for everything Joe Biden
yes, you are, you bastard.
Ever did.
I paid $5 a gallon yesterday, you son of a bitch.
That's right. It's like, dude, I disagree with him on just about everything he's done. I think he's a terrible president. I voted for him, and I did so in the moment when I voted for him. Like I did so him versus Donald Trump, and that I made my decision, and I get to live with that, and I get to learn from that and do it the way I want to do it. But I'm not scared to talk about. My grandfather used to say, at the dinner table, we don't talk about politics, sex, or religion. I was like, well, then what the fuck are we going to talk about, man? Those
are the 3 most important things.
This is life, dude. This is our lives. I should be able to talk about like how I see politics today and adjust that tomorrow when I learn new things, and make mistakes and not have somebody tell me you're not on my team, so you're awful. And so like if somebody criticizes me as a liberal, I'll go, well, you clearly don't know me. And I've recorded hundreds and hundreds of hours of me talking. So if you want to get to know me, it's
out there forever.
It's right there for you. And then, when people would say like, you bastard, I'd be like, just listen. If you want to know why I did what I did, it's right there. Like, take a listen. And
in that moment, that's what I meant.
And if you disagree, then I'd love to hear why you disagree.
Yeah.
And if you hate me immediately, I think that's probably on you. And that shouldn't be the way that we approach this thing. And I'll probably it's going to be hard for me to vote for a liberal ever again after what we've seen in the last couple of years. But if a good one comes out, I'll certainly consider it.
No, my wife and I debate about this all the time because, again, I'm more conservative and she's more liberal. We both have very independent leanings too, but I voted for Trump. She voted for Biden, I think. We actually don't tell each other. But she knows. And you know, I thought there was no great choice, and I stated my argument. She stated hers, but we still loved each other, went to bed, and we're very happily married. But I think this is the whole problem. It's like, even me saying I voted for Trump, ooh, like I'm the devil now, right?
Yeah.
Look, I just don't think none of these things have black and white answers, and I don't think really anything does, actually. So I think listening to people like you and Joe and whoever else is just helps us all learn that, like, being curious and seeking truth, maybe never finding, but at least setting out and seeking to find it. And you make decisions that are good and bad. You say things that are shitty and not shitty, but you just keep moving on and kind of be unapologetically you. Hopefully that's the way to a better life. And that's kind of that Ryan Holiday book that you mentioned, The Obstacle is the Way. The easiest thing to do, what I learned from that book, and I usually just take a few things from books. I'm not a good reader. I'm terrible. I listen to them. But with that book, my main takeaway was usually there's an easy path and a hard path in decisions. And you have a general sense of the hard path and the easy path. And as humans, we typically don't like choosing something that's going to be harder on us. But oftentimes, and Barklow said this the other day when I was talking to him, he said, oftentimes I choose it because it is harder, and that has turned out to be the right way. And it's definitely much harder to stop packaging people into these personas and listen to what they actually have to say. It's much harder to do that than it is just to say, oh, lib, hashtag lib. Ben O'Brien's a liberal.
The libs. Yeah,
David Brinker's just a QAnon supporting, mega hat wearing Trump supporter.
Bro, when I watch like news channels now, it makes me laugh. And I'm talking almost all of them outside of the like ABC, NBC. They at least try to make it serious. Like when I watch some of these things, I laugh and I just think, boy, we are not making it easy for ourselves. Like, this is insane.
Oh my God, man. Turn on CNN or Fox News, whichever
CNN,
one you want.
CNN is like, what world are you living in? What are you talking about?
Oh my God.
It's not even good. And it's like, okay, so somebody like, we stop to, why do people, and I hate to always bring it back to Rogan, but why do we, instead of saying like, we don't like what he said, let's ask the question, why do 100 million people listen to his show? It's not like, why did he take ivermectin? It's like, why did he get better?
Now, Ben, that was a horse deworming medicine.
I know. I've seen the guy. He's super healthy. He can, it's just, we have to, we're stopping. And this is in the hunting industry too. And I have to do this myself. Whenever I see something that makes me upset, I say like, okay, how can I get back to my own personal mission? And this for the first time when I flipped jobs here recently and started a new podcast and really started kind of a new life professionally at the very least. It was the first time I sat down with myself and I said, what is your personal mission in your professional life? What's your mission? Because my mission in my personal life is my family. That there's nothing outside of that. It's them and that's it. And for my professional life, I thought, well, I need to have a through line with everything that I do. The job I take, the podcast I do, the media, where I spend my time. So much of this is time. And I was like, well, okay. I sat down one night and smoked a joint and thought about it. And what I came up with was, hey, my mission is to create new hunters, and in doing so, create informed hunting advocates, not activists, not people that are ideologues and just shout about how great hunting is without thinking about it. But that's my personal through line for.
And is that because this is one thing I want to ask you about? Is creating new hunters the most important thing to save hunting? Or like, what's that's
Right,
your mission,
yeah.
but why? I guess is what I'm asking.
Yeah. Well, I came into this and I remember our mutual buddy Brian Call. I remember one time it was like ATA 2016 or something. And I was not having a good day. And I went on his podcast at the ATA show. And I kind of spouted off about grip and grins and some other stuff. If I haven't listened back to it, if I did now, I'd probably hate myself for some of the stuff, some of the ways I approached some of the issues. And in that kind of wrong-headed approach, I started thinking that hunting had a PR problem. Is where I was at. Hunting had a public relation. If only we would talk about it differently and do it differently, people will accept it. Bullshit. The reality, what I've learned in the years since, is that it has a connection problem. That's the problem. People need to be connected to it personally to understand it. It is an incredibly complex thing to understand. You can't understand it from a New York Times article. Sure as shit can not understand it from a Joe Rogan podcast. You're not going to understand it. No. Michael Pollan said this in Onward's Dilemma. It is an incredibly different thing from the inside than it is from the outside.
That's a really good point, man.
Yeah. And so it's like, to me, it's, so I have a nonprofit about mentorship. In my profession, in like my career, I'm working on mentorship all the time. I'm trying to bring people on my own podcast that can help inform me and the listeners about how to approach and think about really complex issues. And so for me, I realized if I can help connect people to hunting. So it's not that the number of hunters or license sales is important. A connection could be anything. It could be anything. Yeah. I think the ultimate connection is to go hunting and do it and see what it's like. But connecting people to hunting can be done in a myriad of ways. Really just mentoring a new hunter, have that new hunter go back to their own community and talk about how cool it was. That's enough for me.
Will Primos said something on a project I worked on a long time ago that's always stuck with me. And he said, teach someone to love something and they'll want to protect it.
Yeah.
And I think in essence, that's what you're saying is like and that doesn't have to be pulling the trigger. It doesn't even have to be, I don't know. Like I know quite a few people. My mother is a good example. My mother has never been hunting, but my dad and my grandpa and his dad, like we've been hunters our whole life. I mean, she'll come out and look at the dead deer in the back of the truck and say, "Oh, get that thing out of here." But she respects it and she understands. She actually has a love for it that's it's a different type of love, but she does appreciate it and love it. So I think what you're saying, and I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but I'm trying to process what you're saying is whatever the connection might be, that's it. I remember a conversation I had. I met a non-hunter, like avid, like non-hunter one time at a campfire, and we were over on the Oregon coast and we were camping down there. And the next day I said, "Hey, jump in the truck with me, man. I want to show you something." And we drove up the hill and there was a herd of elk out in the fields. And I spent like a half hour trying to explain to him how much I love those animals and how much I know about them and respect them and all these things. And when we left that drive, literally to this day, he still tells me, I still don't necessarily agree with it. I don't want to do it. I don't even really want to hear about it. But I now understand it.
Yeah.
At least, and he's like, that really helped me. Like, I can he's like, he can even defend it a little bit. But he doesn't, he's one of those people, I don't even want to know where my burger comes from, but I love the burger.
Yeah.
So.
And if you shout that person down and go like, "You're a hypocrite," like,
right.
Where's that going to get you, man? Like, it doesn't, right. Those connections I'm talking about, and whether I had a guy from New York City, I won't mention his name, but he's gay. And he wrote me one time and wrote me an email and said, "Hey, look, as a gay man, it's so hard to understand where you're coming from. Like, it's so hard to listen to these stories and know that, like, I live in New York City, I'm homosexual, like, I'm just different. I'm different. And I said, "Man, the only thing I can tell you is connect with somebody who cares about this and share that connection with them, share that value system with them, grow that, and maybe pick somebody you're not supposed to be friends with, or maybe pick somebody that you think if you would meet them stereotypically that you guys would never be friends. Those are the things to me when I hear those things, and that guy later on came back to me and like, I'm a hunter now. Like it was like a year later. Like, I'm a hunter now, guys. And he writes me emails pretty consistently these days. And that to me is worth its weight in gold. I mean, it's worth its weight. And I've been in the business of media, right? Where we say how many views, how many engagements in the world of algorithms, in the world of kind of where we kind of dream up these connections and we name them as engagements, and we have untold algorithms telling us what to do and what not to do, and what communication that we can have and what we can't have, and what's effective communication depending on what the algorithm likes. And he's like, man, that kind of thinking and that kind of speech stops you from having those very important connections with people in the way that you want to have them. And I think it also forces you to be yourself, because even if the algorithm just wants you to post like one thing, there's a lot of really cool people out there that just post what they feel in that moment, even if it isn't going to get the maximum amount of likes. That trueness is attractive to me. And when I see it in myself, I'm proud of it. And when I see it in other people, I'm proud of it. And like I said, I come back to that connection. I started a mentorship group organically with a bunch of listeners of my podcast, and we started a 501c3 together. Like I'm going out this weekend to do a hunt with people I met who are listeners of my podcast, and wanted to mentor folks and wanted to were inspired by some of the things that we had said and wanted to do it. And just connecting with those folks was enough to keep me excited about talking shit in microphones.
Where can people find more about you and listen to your podcast? And even I want to know more about that organization.
Yeah, so it's all kind of intertwined anyway. But yeah, Woodside with Ben O'Brien is the podcast. So you can find that anywhere that you find any podcasts, and that's free as could be, just like most shows. And then I have Woodside Premium, which is a subscription. I guess you could say it's a subscription parallel to the free version. So free comes out on Tuesday. And then on Thursday, we put out an additional podcast behind the paywall there. And so if you're not into paying for podcasts, we got one for you. And if you want to dive deeper into some of the things that we do, we have Hunter and Vegan, the show we talked about, is behind the paywall and the premium. We have a show with Sam Soholt and I did about turkey hunting called Roost. It's basically a masterclass on turkey hunting with all the best turkey hunters we could find. We're going to do one of those on elk as well. A bunch of cool stuff there. And you can find that at woodside.supercast.com. And then the Hunt in Common is our 501c3. And as soon as I get done here, I'm going to get on a call with our team that's building our website and doing all the fun stuff. But this is it's a long-term localized hunting mentorship group. We have chapters, state chapters. I want to say we have 30 states right now, and about 5,000 to 6,000 members across those things. And we are formalizing a localized mentorship program that'll be a 10-track program to teach folks how to mentor, and also a website where folks can connect with mentors in their state. And the idea is mentorship isn't just a field to table weekend. It isn't just one trip. Mentorship is a relationship with someone else, a connection with someone else that wants to show you what they know. They don't have to be an expert. They just got to know some things that you don't know. And luckily I've been able to meet through my podcast, my former podcast, a bunch of people that care about that and we elected as officers. We have chapter leaders who are all volunteer. All of them came to this organically. And so I'm proud we have former NFL players. We have a biotech engineer who's running a startup out of LA. We got sales guys from Wisconsin. We got every walk of life, trying to make this thing happen. So it's basically me and a bunch of people who volunteer to create something out of thin air. So We've been doing it since May, and it's the thing. That's the thing that really gets me going, gets me up in the morning.
That's cool, man. Congrats on all the success. I'm super excited to see this new chapter, and I appreciate you coming on the show today. I'm sure there'll be multiple versions of this over the years. Yeah, man, best of luck.
I appreciate it, man. Good. Congrats on this show and doing what you're doing, your music, everything that you're doing with all your businesses and companies. It's been fun to travel along in this industry with you, and I'm grateful for the time.
Thanks, buddy.